Hey everyone, this is Jennifer Beamer, owner-operator of Actually Diet Art by Science, and this is the daily vlog episode number 58. And today we are talking about hand-dyed yarn. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about my hand-dyed yarn. So yes, this is some shameless self-promotion, but hey, welcome to my channel, where I want to talk about these mainly because this was an aspect of Expertly Dyed that I have been unable to get back to for a very long time. So back in the day, I started my business. It was predominantly hand-dyed yarns made to repeatable colorways using a dye calculator that I created, and this was sort of on the back end of my first master's degree, which really exposed me to natural dyeing. So rather than disregard my desire to have beautiful hand-knitted things that I don't always have to make the yarn for, I decided it was about time to revisit the hand-dyed stuff. And I think it must have been 2019 when I bought some yarn and experimented with dyes because I wasn't able to use the dyes I had used previously. And so this was an opportunity for me to kind of experiment with new methods of dyeing, different colors, different dyes, just to kind of get a feel for what it was that was the trend. So now that I have recently been offered an investment, I am now able to feature my hand-dyed yarns in repeatable colorways. So this one, for example, is turquoise, and this one is reveal. Mainly, I struggled to find a better name for this. So I have a whole bunch on my website. So far, I have 24 colors that are all repeatable, and I kind of split them into what I would consider like high contrast color and low contrast. So these I would consider high contrast. So if you were to knit these up into samples, there would be massive color shifts, which actually can look really, really nice if you're doing plain knitting or knitting where the types of stitches you're using wouldn't be obfuscated with this disparity in color. Also with weaving, if you're just doing plain weaving, then the color does all of the speaking and you just have to, do the wefts back and forth. It's really, really simple. I like simple. Then I also have other ones which I would consider more low contrast. So these here, this one is Tanzanite and this one is Pebble. I'm trying to remember all of the names. So again, the disparity in the color for these is going to be much more subtle. You will still see some variation, but they won't be as much of a contrast. Let's say if we compared these two together. So yeah, I'll show you in the samples how this actually renders itself out. But I've also got two new colorways that I've got so far for the autumn. So this one's called Pumpkin. And this one has some really lovely golden hues, oranges, a little bit of brown, and itself kind of looks like a pumpkin. The other color that I have is this one, which I've called Last Harvest. And again, this one I would consider more high contrast because there's a lot more colors going on in this and different saturation levels. So if you look at these kind of like side by side, you sort of get a sense of what I'm talking about. So the pumpkin, when you knit this up or weave it, it's going to be more subtle than this one, which you'll have anything between a very pale purple or pink to a dark brown. So if you wanted to make something that was more stitch heavy, so you're going to use stitches for the texture, then you might want to go with something that is a little bit more subdued or the contrast is lower. than in something like this, which might make your pattern more difficult to see in terms of the texture. But again, I have also played around with using a high contrast yarn or something that has a lot of visible texture in the yarn itself, and paired it with a knitted stitch that is a lot more textured. And you know, sometimes it's just up to finding the right combination of them or your personal choice. So there's a whole lot of different colors here for you to choose from. So if you haven't seen that I have yarns, please do go check them out. So these are slowly being made from each of these samples that I keep for my personal use, just to make sure that the colors are consistent from batch to batch. So I've done a woven sample and a knitted sample for everything, and I'm working on getting the crocheted sample so that you get a sense of how these colorways look when they're actually used in the various types of craft. But first I wanted to show you what the high contrast yarns look like. So this one here, this one's called Detritus, and it's really lovely how you've got like these yellows and oranges and greens and then those little black splotches. It almost gives it kind of like a plaid effect. And then here is the knitted sample, which again, if you wanted a real statement pair of socks, this is definitely it, or even one of those slouchy beanies. This would look really cool. And I've got the same over here in copper ore. So again, here is the woven sample, which you can see it just naturally creates this beautiful plaid-like effect. And then again, the knitted sample. And it's very loud, it's very high contrast, and as a result, it's just like, wow, amazing color. And again, if you are knitting miles and miles of stockinette, or you're just doing a really basic woven scarf where maybe you just don't want to set it up for a plaid, which I can see why there, then something like this might be really well suitable for you. But then on the other side are some of the more low contrast colors. So this one is called Edge. And again, you still have a lot of that variation and that little hint of purple there. But overall, it feels more like a mottled mosaic. And here's the knitted version of that. Still a bit of a contrast, but something that you could wear as a sweater quite easily, I think. And it might actually look really beautiful with really simple lace patterns or even cables. And then this one, which is a personal favorite, not biased at all. This is called Montezuma's Hoard. Again, here we have the woven sample, and you can see how there's a little bit of variation, although it's not quite so extreme. The color family is quite restricted. Just a tiny little bit of olive green there at the bottom. And then the knitted sample. Again, quite nice. So I am in the middle of finishing up these samples, and once I am done, I have been photographing these and posting them with the listings so that you can actually see in greater detail what the yarns look like in at least these two forms of craft. So I've got those with more on the way. This one, for example, I still have to photograph. This one is Midnight. Again, something I would consider low contrast, even though you do have sort of these lighter colors interspersed. This one just looks like it needs to be a plaid scarf. And then the knitted sample version. Now, if you're not familiar with working with hand-dyed yarn, one of the things that I love about it is it doesn't lend itself to pooling. So what do I mean by that? Let's say you're going to start working on a shawl and you go back and forth, adding stitches as you go. So you have just a few stitches at the top, but as that fabric grows, you're adding more and more stitches. So with hand-dyed yarn, because there's a little bit of chaos, but not so much that you would be able to see the difference between one skein and the next, what you'll end up with is this beautifully made piece where visibly you cannot tell where you started in the project. And so you don't have this color sort of repeating and then suddenly that repeat disappears because you're now knitting longer lengths. So with hand-dyed yarn, you get to avoid what commercial yarns face, which is the dreaded pooling. And the way that I dye significantly downplays that effect. And having worked with my own hand-dyed yarns, I can also attest to this. Every year I like to work on my own project because I like to wear the stuff that I create, not just sell it or give it away. And if I don't make time for myself, then I end up not making anything for myself. I just end up fantasizing about what I want and then I don't actually make it. So this was such a project. Now you may recognize the yarn because I discussed this on my blog, which I need to get back to. But essentially I dyed these skeins of yarn to show you ways to vary the dye according to kind of what you want the yarn to look like. So here is this shawl. It's really a very simple shawl. And I have knitted it with 2 skeins of yarn, which you can't tell, even if I hold it up all the way at the top, you can't tell if there's a transition in color. And where I started it, up here, these little stitches right here, this little grouping, there isn't any color pooling. So you really can't tell where I started the shawl, and because you have these color variations sort of interspersed, there's no discernible pattern in the color, which means you can let the pattern or the stitches do the work for you. So this is one reason why I love working with hand-dyed yarn, because it's predictable in terms of making sure that the color is consistent from skein to skein, but the tiniest little bit of variation due to human error, which in this case is constructed human error, not just I didn't know what I was doing, results in fabric that looks perfectly well designed. And so if you have struggled with various patterns trying to figure out ways to get the colors to work out to your advantage, then consider using hand-dyed yarn. And I'm not the only one who would point these things out. There are loads of people out there who are knitters who love working with hand-dyed yarn but aren't dyers themselves. And there are loads of fantastic and super well-talented hand dyers out there who create yarns this way as well. So if you're new to knitting and maybe you want to give hand-dyed yarn a try, this is a huge reason why you might want to. I've always been satisfied with the hand-dyed yarn that I've bought. I've used loads of Malabrigo yarns over the years, which are technically still hand-dyed, and why this one reminds me so much of their dyeing. So yeah. I might have run out of things to say. So essentially, I've got all of these samples that I'm making, and they've been photographed and are making their way to Etsy and my website so that you can actually see how these colors look, either woven or knitted. And gosh, some of them are just, I love how they both look so different, and I love how different they look. So I can see myself weaving with them and also knitting with them and being quite happy with the results. So this one, I mean, look at that. It looks like plaid to me. The easy version of plaid, I guess. And so I've got a lot of these still left to go. I have some that are ready to be washed and blocked, and then I can get those photographed. More of these to come. This one, I'm really looking forward to how this one's going to look. So this is based off of a piece of rock called Larimar or Larimar. Larimar? I don't know how it's pronounced. But it had sort of like, almost like these neon greenish blue hues with some more darker muted saturated hues. So this is going to be a fun color to see how it looks both woven and knitted. And it's a little bit outside my comfort zone. So I love looking at it and I loved dyeing it. So we'll have to see how this turns out, but maybe it might be a challenge to sort of play around with these colors that I love looking at, but maybe make me feel uncomfortable to wear them. So if you just make something beautiful and you wear it, maybe that's all you need to do to kind of overcome that issue with your personal comfort zone. And of course, there's always somebody out there who loves colors like this, but they're not made in commercial factories. So the only way you're gonna get them really is by a hand dyer. I hope you liked this video. It's a little bit, I always feel a little bit awkward promoting my own business, which is funny because the whole point of me talking about these hand-dyed yarns is to make you aware of them, because all of those sales directly support me as a creator, and as a human, I like to be able to pay my bills every month. So apologies if I was a little bit kooky in this episode, but really I love hand-dyed yarn. Every time I go to a yarn store, I end up having to buy something. I had lots of stuff from our local yarn store before she ended up closing. So unfortunately all that yarn is gone, but I'm definitely the kind of person who, despite making all of her own stuff, still has to buy something from somebody else because I think everyone makes more brilliant colors than me. So in this video, I'm trying to like step outside my comfort zone and tell you guys why my colors are great and why I love them and sort of how they look, sort of knitted and woven, so that you can get an idea. Anyway, I'm rambling a little bit here. So anyway, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Again, my website is expertlydyed.com, or the same on Etsy. If you want to support me as a creator directly, you can with Patreon, so you can find the link below. If you have any questions or comments, also put that in the comments below. I will see you in the next daily vlog, which will hopefully be sooner than 8 months from now. Thanks for watching. Bye!